On the morning of December 24, 2002, the Peterson family home in Modesto, California, was bustling with New Year's preparations, just like any normal family. Husband and wife Scott and Laci Peterson began their day in an ordinary way. At 27, Laci was in the happiest phase of her life. She was in her 8th month of pregnancy and would soon name their son Connor. There were all the signs of a happy life: their new home, their love for each other, and their impending baby. From the outside, everything seemed perfect, but that perfection would be shattered in just a few hours. Laci's husband, Scott Peterson, had left home that day and gone fishing in San Francisco Bay. According to a statement he later gave to police, he last saw Laci alive and well that morning. He claimed she was going for a walk with their dog, Mackenzie. When Scott returned hours later, in the afternoon, the house was strangely quiet. The door was locked and the key was hanging inside the lock. Scott immediately knew this was not normal. Laci and her dog, Mackenzie, were missing. Scott began searching for Laci. Just a few hours ago, everything had been normal. Now, that warm home had been replaced by an alarming silence. This silence foreshadowed the scream that would later be heard by the entire nation. As the hours passed, Scott called Laci's family. Laci's mother, Sharon Rocha, worried when she couldn't reach her daughter, called the police. That evening, Laci Peterson was officially reported missing. From that moment on, one of America's largest and most closely followed search operations began. Police arrived at Laci's house immediately. There were no signs of forced entry. Everything was in order. The only oddity was that Mackenzie was found off-leash, her fur partially wet, in the neighbor's yard. This detail raised a significant question. If Laci had gone for a walk, why was her dog off-leash and left alone? This was a completely strange situation. Growing suspicions and media attention. At first, everyone thought Laci had been abducted. A massive search was launched. People volunteered to join the search. Police plastered Laci's photos everywhere. Television channels were constantly reporting Laci's disappearance on their news reports. People across America prayed for the quick recovery of this young pregnant woman. But as the search continued, suspicion gradually fell on Laci's husband, Scott. Scott's behavior was unlike that of someone who had lost a spouse in a crisis. In front of the media, he acted as if he were performing on stage. There were no tears in his eyes, no trace of anxiety. His voice was unwavering. He sounded as if he were discussing a missing item, not a missing person. Most striking was the fact that immediately after the incident, he shaved his beard and dyed his hair blonde. This was not the typical behavior of a grieving husband. Furthermore, shortly after Laci's disappearance, he attempted to sell her car and canceled her gym membership. These were all warning signs for the police. Scott was cold and distant, even at press conferences for his missing wife. It was as if the whole thing was a chore for him. Laci's family and friends were also bothered by Scott's cold demeanor. When they reached out to support him during this difficult time, Scott was less than welcoming. Even Laci's family began to harbor suspicions. Within weeks, the murder case had become a national tragedy. By the way, if you enjoyed the content, don't forget to subscribe and like the channel. Now that we've made that point, let's move on to the video: Lies, Betrayals, and a Detective Story. As the investigation deepened, it became clear that Scott had a secret life. Before Laci's disappearance, Scott was in a relationship with a woman named Amber Frey. In fact, Amber believed Scott was single and never married. Scott continued seeing Amber even after Laci's disappearance. This shocked both the police and the public. Scott pretended to search for his missing wife while simultaneously planning a new life with her lover. The police saw this as an opportunity. They decided to collaborate with Amber Frey. With the police's help, Amber began secretly recording her phone calls with Scott. These recordings revealed that Scott had consistently lied, even avoiding talking about Laci's disappearance. Scott had even lied to Amber about being on a business trip in Europe and about losing his family. These recordings would play a key role in Scott's case. The audio recordings demonstrated the inconsistency of Scott's lies and his apparent indifference to his missing wife. Each lie was a stepping stone to his next step. Horrific news from the Bay months passed. By March, hopes were dwindling. Everyone was beginning to think the worst-case scenario had come true, and that worst-case scenario came true on April 13, 2003. On the shores of San Francisco Bay, a dog walker found a body washed ashore. The body was unrecognizable. Another baby's body was found nearby. DNA tests confirmed the bodies were those of Laci Peterson and her unborn son, Connor. This news sent shockwaves across the country, and a murder investigation officially began. Scott Peterson instantly became the prime suspect. Police focused on the boat Scott had used for fishing that day. Examination of his boat and truck yielded clues. Scott's boat had been used in the same bay where Laci and Connor were found. Scott's spending during that period also raised suspicions. He had canceled the gym membership in Laci's name and even tried to sell Laci's car. This cold, uncaring demeanor made him appear even more guilty. Police continued to gather evidence to link Scott to the murder. Scott's cell phone records were examined. It was determined that he was near San Francisco Bay on the day he disappeared. The boat he had taken for fishing and its trailer were examined. The fact that both bodies were found so close to where Scott claimed to be fishing could not have been a coincidence. The great confrontation and verdict in the courtroom. Scott Peterson's murder trial began in 2004. The trial turned into a media circus. Everyone had their own opinions. One side believed Scott was guilty, while the other maintained his innocence. The prosecution presented Scott's relationship with Amber Frey as the primary motivation for the murder. The prosecutor argued that Scott killed her to maintain the relationship and escape Laci's pregnancy. The strongest evidence was Scott's claim that he carried Laci's body on his fishing boat on the day of the incident and threw her overboard. The prosecution presented Scott's contradictory statements, cold-blooded behavior, and relationship with Amber Frey to the jury. Police also presented evidence showing that Laci's clothing and jewelry were missing from Scott's home, and that Scott had withdrawn money from Laci's wallet and used her credit cards. When the jury put all this circumstantial evidence together, a picture of Scott's guilt emerged. The defense argued that Scott was innocent, that Laci may have been abducted, and that her body may have been dumped in the bay later. However, the jury could not ignore Scott's lies and motivation. The trial dragged on for months, hearing from more than 100 witnesses. Legal experts commented on the case daily on television. Finally, the jury reached its verdict. On November 12, 2004, the jury found Scott Peterson guilty of first-degree murder. This verdict caused a profound silence in the courtroom. Developments following the verdict and remaining questions. Following his conviction, Scott was sentenced to death on March 16, 2005. But the story didn't end there. After years of appeals, the California Supreme Court overturned Peterson's death sentence in 2020, citing irregularities during jury selection. The case was retried, and Peterson was sentenced to life in prison instead of the death penalty. He remains in prison. So what really happened? Who killed Laci Peterson? The answer to this question has been given to the legal and justice system, but some people still believe Scott Peterson may be innocent. Perhaps this explains why the murder case remains so controversial. Remember that sometimes the most terrifying monsters hide behind the happiest family portraits. This case wasn't just a murder case. It was a story that demonstrated the power of the media, public sentiment, and how a murder can affect a nation. Laci's story remains a symbol of the quest for justice and the suspicion of even those closest to us. This case has once again brought home to us the reality that criminals can be close to us, and seemingly ordinary lives can actually hide horrific secrets. If you enjoyed the content, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Don't forget to leave your comments below. See you in the next video. Take care and goodbye.